All right, we're going to go ahead and begin here in Nehemiah chapter 3 in just a moment there. Before we begin, let us go to our Heavenly Father in a word of prayer. And Dale, would you mind directing our minds in that prayer?
Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day and for the blessings You've given us. Thank Thee, Father, for the good night's rest and for this privilege we have to come together to study Thy Word. We appreciate so much to be able to be with brothers and sisters in Christ, to share a common love for Thee, and we ask that You be with us as we look into the book of Nehemiah, that we might have a full understanding of those things that You want us to know, that we might be a better servant of Thee. We're thankful for John, and we ask that You be with him this morning as he leads us in the discussion of this book, and help him to have a ready recollection of those things that he has prepared. We ask, Father, that You be with those of our numbers who are physically ill, that they might be restored to our health, to their health. And we ask that You be with our sister Betty as she's sick this morning, and others that we may not know of, that they might be restored to their health, be able to continue to serve Thee as You would have them do so. We ask also, Father, that You be with our federal government, that they would work together to solve our debt crisis, to make this a better country, that each one of us can serve Thee and worship Thee without fear of persecution. We ask that You would help us, that we'd always give You the praise and glory, and never bring any shame or reproach upon Thee or upon the church. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen. A couple of brief announcements. I neglected to put in the bulletin that this Saturday night is time change. We turn our clocks ahead. So just kind of keep that in mind and take your anti-grumpy pill, so when you hear Sunday morning, you'll be in good spirits.
I have to admonish the guy that makes the announcement that he forgot to do it somewhere, too.
He did.
Well, that means that nobody told me. And I asked 3 other elders, do they have
Which-
any announcements? So it's all one of us' fault.
Which is odd for Dale not to have known that. Retirement's really getting the best of it. I didn't know it was coming up. Kelvin Lady showed me on the computer and I thought we had already done the change. They said, no, it's still coming. So
I've got too many things to do here. I can't remember everything.
Sure you can.
Dale, we still have high hopes for you. Expectations and all.
Last time I went on vacation, I came back, had about 12 checks to sign. Dan was complaining. I said, well, if you people would help me, you wouldn't have so many checks to sign at once.
The other announcement is either this Thursday or Friday, I need to call and confirm this. Miss Claudine's going in for surgery. And another thing I needed to put into the bulletin. What they're doing this time is the screws that they put in into her back, they're going to have to remove because she's still in a lot of pain, and the doctor is pretty much figured out that it's irritation from the screws. And so they're going to have to go in and basically take those out. Oh, RJ, that's right. RJ's, as a matter of fact, I've got something I received this morning, which reminds me to turn my phone down too. Here's what the update on RJ, and we need to keep him in our prayers. He went in doing very well, other than, of course, the surgery that needed to be done. But on this one update we have here, let's see, and this was put on Facebook and then sent out through an email. This was as of Monday, 11:30, from Tim Stevens. Due to my dad's lack of responsiveness on his left side last Friday, there was concern regarding a possible stroke. However, the neurologist checked him yesterday, giving him several commands, and he responded well on both sides. When I asked my dad last night to squeeze my hand with his left hand to see if he was hearing our quartet recording, he did. When I mentioned that Paula was taking care of our mother, his bottom lip quivered and his eyes opened with tears. It's very, she's his life, and he feels like he needs to be there. So then later yesterday, MRI results today show small spots on the side of RJ's brain, which indicates that he has experiencing a mini stroke or strokes. We are hoping to know more this evening. We're deeply troubled at this time. And he kind of talks about how he'd gone in real strong, but now there's a lot of difficulties. So need to continue to keep Brother Stevens in our prayers.
Are you down?
to surgery singing.
Yes, yeah, he did. The nurses asked him what was his favorite song, and he told them, and as they were rolling in, they were all singing his favorite song. So. Okay, we are picking up this morning in Nehemiah chapter 3. I know y'all have been waiting with bated breath that we would get to this chapter, and you would all want to share in the reading of this. However, I think what I'm going to do is we're going to kind of semi-read through it and more kind of just walking through it with the charts up here. Or with the verses. I do have a couple of charts that we'll kind of use in some of this. One thing we need to note that with a lot of these references, there are several of them that we just don't know positively where they're at. Okay, that identification. But the charts we have kind of give a rough guesstimate as to where they might be. But this is very important because it is about the rebuilding of the wall. And so let's start there in verse 1. And Dan had made me a handy dandy pointer. So use that. Anyway. All right, let's start in verse 1 there. And what I like to do is just follow me, and we're going to kind of walk down through, let's say, verse 7 there.
If you use that little PowerPoint sheet,
Mm-hmm.
it's got a pointer on the end of it.
I know, but Dan made this for me, and I can do like that.
And you can reach out and hit a student.
And if you fall asleep, I can.
There you go.
I'm not going to say anything that you can reach me with.
Okay, let's start here. All right, so we have here in verse 1, Elisha, the high priest, he rose up with his brethren there, and they built the sheep gate. Okay, so kind of give you a rough idea of where, of this particular gate. If you can see the chart, and if I need to make it larger, let me know. They think the sheep gate's kind of right up here. And with the starting of the description here, and let me show it to the people at home. As we read through the description, it seems as if they kind of go around, in kind of the listing of what's being built. But this approximately here would be the sheep gate up towards the top area of that chart there. Okay. So, coming back to this then, we notice there continuing that he says that they consecrated it and hung its doors. Exactly. And so they continued to build. They built as far as the Tower of the 100 and consecrated it. Then as far as the Tower of Hanel there. So let's bring the chart back up. Again, we're not, here we have us going in this direction. Possible location of the Tower of 100. Possible location of the Tower of Hanel. Seen up there at the top. Now, one of the things that's interesting to remember about this is that it wasn't one group of hired contractors who was going to build the walls. There was different families, different groups, different people who all had a responsibility. And some of them, their responsibility probably existed in around their house, out in the area where they owned or where they lived at. And then other areas beyond that. Now, I just remembered something that doesn't have a lot to do with our current reading, but I want to share it with you. In our last night at the house, we were looking in Jeremiah chapter 36, wasn't that right, Rhonda? And then back to 32 with Baruch. Baruch, who's not, it's not the same Baruch as we'll read a little bit later here. He's the one that Jeremiah issued him the orders to write everything that the Lord was commanded. So Baruch recorded this. Well, anyway, you go to chapter 32 of Jeremiah, you find that they were instructed to take the deeds of the land and put them in earthen vessels to keep track of. Now, the reason why I make this point is that this time frame that I'm referencing with Jeremiah was when Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, took the throne. Josiah, if you remember, was the last righteous king. He made great reforms, but God said essentially, it's too late. So he let Josiah have a good, peaceful life. After he died, Jehoiakim, I think, who took the throne, and it was him during his reign there that Jeremiah and much of his writings began. But it was interesting that basically the deeds for their lands were put in earthen vessels and kept so they would be protected. Now we don't know, we kind of speculated maybe they buried them. So that when the people came back to the land, they could go and pull up proof, here, this is our land, we own it. Or when they came back, they would carry it with them, showing that, hey, this is our land, we own it. Something interesting to kind of bring to attention, because we have them now rebuilding their areas, the city, around the walls here. So, all right, any thoughts about that?
Can you explain more what they mean by concentrated?
Probably, let's see. They built as far as the Tower of 100 and consecrated it. More than likely offered a sacrifice, something that would basically make it, this is now completed and set apart for the protection of the Lord's city.
King James Version uses the word they sanctified,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Sanctified it?
Okay, this
Yeah.
one says.
which means simply that they prepared or they repaired it.
Yeah, got it completely
The
finished.
sheep gate, if you go to John the 5th chapter, verse 2,
Uh-huh.
and all of these gates, we don't really know very much about them.
Right.
But the thought is the sheep gate was the gate where they brought the sheep in. There was a pool to wash the sheep close by it, and this is where they brought them in for the sacrifices.
What reference was that?
John the 5th chapter, verse 2.
It's a very good point. Notice there he says, as you said, now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool. And that's a very good point there. It would have been the area that would have brought the sheep in for the sacrifices. And there would have been a pool there for the washing or cleansing as needed to be done there. It's a good point. All right, any thoughts or comments? All right, let's see. Now let's go back here to verse number 2 there. Now, notice here as we look at this, he says, next to Eliashib, the men of Jericho built. Okay? Next to Eliashib, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zakur, the son of Imri, built. Just kind of going into a succession here.
And I think it's something interesting. If you go back to verse 1, Elisha, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests.
Yeah.
The point is that the high priest, who was the grandchild of Joshua, and the first high priest there, he got up and he started working just as well as the others. In fact, he kind of took the lead in beginning the work, rather than standing back and saying, well, no, I'm a high priest, I don't have to do any work.
That's true. The grandson of Jeshua, the priest during Zerubbabel's time. I think that's a very good point. He was not simply the foreman. I mean, he was with them. They all rose up. And everybody now, we will a little bit later, we're going to find a group of nobles who didn't have anything to do with this. They didn't want to help build it. All right, but their people did. And they're going to be in the southern portion there below Jerusalem. But here's a great example of the ones who, in times past, would have said, no, this, we're above this. They're saying we're going to help. And they did help. It's a very good point. Any other thoughts? Yes, Gene.
Yeah, Dale's comment earlier when he read John that the sheep gate potentially was where they brought the sheep in, the cleansing and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It would be reasonable that the priests would be most interested in that because they're the one offering the sacrifices.
That's right.
So they're going to go out and complete what's initially necessary for them to do their work, which is to offer the sacrifice.
That's right. And we can see that when we look at the temple, in the location of it, the Temple Mount, where the sheep gate would have been located at. It's a very good point. All right, any other thoughts? All right, let's notice there let's see, we looked at verse 2 there. Let's come down to verse 3. And let me get to my location here. There we go. All right, now as we start there at verse 3 there, we find the son of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams, hung its doors with its bolts and bars. Now, this is something very important. In a time of ransacking, what would be the first things to destroy and burn?
Gates.
The gates, exactly. All right, you got to destroy the gates. Well, in that case, they're having to come through and rebuild the gates. In this case in point, they laid the beams for the door. They hung its doors with its bolts and its bars. And in verse 4 there we find that next to them we have Merimoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Koz. They made repairs. And then next to them you had Meshullam, the son of Barakai, the son of Meshullam, made repairs. And then next to them, Zadok, the son of Banah, they made repairs. Okay? Any thoughts? Yes, Jim.
Back in chapter 1, where Nehemiah was getting a report, condition of Jerusalem, one of the comments was, and the gates are burned with fire. So
That's right.
Exactly, that follows the suggestion that that's where people go first.
That's right. That's exactly right. Dylan?
You go back to verse 3 and the fish gate. Again, we don't know exactly why they named them, what they did and everything. But the thought is this is either located close by the fish market or this is where they brought the fish in to the area. And because it was located northwestern from Jerusalem, but it was facing the sea. It was kind of the closest gate to the sea.
Right.
Nehemiah 13, verse 16 is a verse that kind of helps with that a little bit.
In Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 16. Let's see. Then the men of Tyre, they dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah. And it may have been through this particular gate. Yeah. And it would stand to reason, because of, you think about the high number of sacrifices that would be brought to the Lord, that would be brought there. It would make sense that they would have different entrances for, certain situations and certain animals, possibly. So I think it's a very, very good point there. You'll notice here on the chart here, and I'll throw this up for the people at home to look at it. We find here we mentioned a while ago about the progression here, looking at the chart to the left there. We started with the sheep gate, now we've gone to the Tower of the 100, and then the Tower of Hanel, and then we're at the fish gate. And all of these things, as was pointed out, are very important to the location of the temple right here, and more than likely for the purpose of either here selling or for the purpose of sacrificing, depending on what the situation was. All right, any thoughts? Ms. Reed?
Isn't it a little unusual to have so many gates into the city? In olden times, in the fortified cities, weren't there just one or two gates?
Well, you had one or two main gates. These gates were more than likely smaller gates, easier to defend, easier to barricade as well. I would think. But that is a very good question, or good point there about that. But there seems to be several of them all through this process here. Yeah. And which would make Jerusalem ripe for the picking when Nebuchadnezzar and his men came calling. There are many places to come in, and it would be harder to defend with so many gates there, I think. It's a good point. Any thoughts? All right, let's see. All right, so we have that there. Let me get my verses back where we need to be here. Now, so we're down to verse 5 now. Now let's talk about verse 5 here for just a moment there. Next to them, the Tekoites made repairs. This is what I referenced a while ago. But their nobles did not put their shoulders to the work of their Lord. For whatever reason, and there are some different speculations and thoughts about this, what I have on that was they may have resented Nehemiah's leadership. They may have thought that it should have been them who would have been in this position. And so possibly the nobles, that is, rejected his leadership and said, we're not going to have anything to do with this. They weren't able to put their shoulders to the work of the Lord. But the people did, though. The Tekoites. All right, and then, notice here in verse 6 here, he says that moreover Jehoiada, the son of Pisiah, and Mushallam, the son of Bezodiah, repaired the old gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. So let's kind of look at our chart here again. Here we're coming back around. We've gone past the fish gate. Now we have the gate of Yeshuana, or possibly the old gate. Could be, when they mention old gate, could be one of the former gates used in the earlier days as the primary entrance. Whereas, and you think about it, we've talked about this before, that initially David just had a small region here, and then Solomon did an expansion to it. And it's possible maybe that would have been the primary entrance at one time. But still a gate, nonetheless, that had to be rebuilt. Any thoughts? Okay, now let's continue here with this. So we have there in verse, they laid streams hundred stores with its bolts and bars. So verse 37 there, he says, and next to them, the Melatiah the Gibeonite, Jagan the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon and Mizpah, repaired the residence of the governor of the region beyond the river here. Now, you've got the Gibeonites here. We've come across them before in our history and so forth. Men of Gibeon, and also Mizpah, the men of Mizpah. Do you recognize that name throughout history? Sorry. Yeah, from time to time. And the note that I have on it is that Mizpah was an important administrative center after the fall of Jerusalem. Apparently the Samaritan governor of beyond the river continued to hold sessions there, at least that's what they're called. And that kind of references Jeremiah chapter 41, verse 1, where it reads, Now it came to pass in the 7th month that Ishmael the son of Nehemiah, the son of Elisham, and the royal family and the officers of the king came with 10 men of Gedaliah, the son of Ahiakim, at Mizpah. And there they ate bread together at Mizpah. So, possibly the new capital, if you would, after Jerusalem fell. Possibly. Not certain about it. Possibly, though. All right, any thoughts?
But this is on the outside of the wall.
Yes, ma'am. Mizpah would have been in a different region altogether, not within the city of Jerusalem. I think that's a very good point there to observe. Yeah. What we're looking at is men coming from Gibeon, men coming from Mizpah. And Mizpah, and I didn't look this up, I probably should have, goes even farther back to a covenant that was made, let's see if I can get this right, between Jacob and Laban. Is that right? Anyone remember that? I think it was between Jacob and Laban, and there's a passage in the Bible where this was done, where Mizpah is taken from. And the passage basically says, God be with you and thee, or with me and thee, as we are separate from one another. Now, I remember that when I was a kid, you could buy a little medallion that was broken in half with that saying on it, give one to your sweetheart, and one to yourself. And I'm almost positive that was at Mizpah, and I think it was Jacob and Laban where they made that agreement there with him.
In Genesis 31, that's right.
Genesis 31. Yeah, okay. So, again, Mizpah in history. We'll go back in history. Thank you. All right, so with that being said, they continued in the repair process. And especially here we observe they repaired the residence of the governor of the region beyond the river. Not necessarily Nehemiah's residence, but the governor that had been in charge of this area. It needed to be rebuilt and restored there. All right, now let's look at verse number 8. So we come down here, and we find that next to him we find a fellow by the name of Ziel, the son of Herahiah, one of the goldsmiths. He made repairs. And next to Hananiah, one of the perfumers, he also made repairs. And they fortified Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Okay? So we kind of look over our chart, see if we have a broad wall on our chart. And not so much, unless it's a little bit farther down here on the map here. We do have the reference to a gate of Ephraim. And like I said, we're not exactly sure where some of these were, but we do see a progress or a procession coming down here beneath the old gate as we continue down in this region here. Okay. All right, any thoughts? Broad wall. That's a hard name to say a lot, I guess. But one interesting thing to note, we mentioned a while ago, Dale did, that priests were involved, but also individuals who were goldsmiths. They got out there working with their hands. And people who were perfumers, they were working with their hands as well. Everybody was involved in trying to get the walls rebuilt, just as they should. Okay, any thoughts or comments?
Did your map show the Tower of Ovens on there?
Mm-hmm.
The broad wall is just past
Oh,
the Tower of Ovens.
just past it, a little bit south of it. Okay, very good. So this would put the, let me bring the chart over there for everybody at home. Here we have the Tower of Ovens, just a little over below the middle point of your screen there. And right below that you'll see Valley Gate, and this region here would have been the broad wall. Okay. All right. Very good point. Any thoughts? All right, let's continue here with this. Notice with me there in verse,
By the way, that
yeah.
came from Nehemiah, the 12th chapter, verse 38.
Nehemiah 12:38 identifies locations, broad wall beneath the Tower of the Ovens. Very good, very good. All right, so let's continue here. So notice verse 9 there. Next to them we have Rephaiah, the son of Hur, leader of half the district of Jerusalem. He made repairs. Now, one thing to note, it does mention Rephaiah as being leader of half of the district of Jerusalem. Possibly indicated that the region of Jerusalem there was divided in two, or at least by oversight. I'm not so sure if this was someone that was put in place by Artaxerxes, by the Persian rulers, or if it was something that was decided on a local level. Or maybe someone that was put in charge of making repairs or overseeing the repairs on this half of Jerusalem. Different possibilities there. Okay. Verse 10 there, we have that next to those individuals was Jediah, the son of Harumphah, and they made repairs. Now notice this phrase, in front of his house. And then next to him was Hattush, the son of Hashabaniah, made repairs as well. So here we have individuals who were just living. They were in charge of building in front of their house, building the walls. Yes, Dave. Did you have a comment? Okay, you really had to look like you had. I'm sorry.
Won't make eye contact again.
All right. So anyway, and I thought that was interesting. Here we've talked about the priests, the goldsmiths, the perfumers, and now just plain old Bob there having to build the gate in front of his house. Everybody was responsible for the rebuilding of the walls, not just a handful of special people, which in and of itself bodes for an interesting parallel to the work of a local church. And that is everyone's responsibility to get the local church to be where it should be. Yeah. All right, notice there in verse 11 now. So here we have in verse 11 that Malchiah, the son of Haram, and Hushab, the son of Pahath Moab, he repaired another section, as well as the Tower of Ovens. Now this is what Dale pointed out a while ago. We have the Tower of Ovens roughly located near what you see, the Valley Gate there. Tower of Ovens is just above the marker there. The Valley Gate is actually more south. You'll see designated by that arrow there. So we had Tower of Ovens. I don't know what the Tower of Ovens was, and I've kind of wondered about that and just haven't really gotten a very good answer for you. Unless it had something to do, well, I'm not really sure. That would not make sense either.
Is this the Gehenna side?
Well,
Which valley are we in?
we're north of the
Kendrick's
Gehenna.
over here.
Yeah, let me slow that down there a little bit. There's the Valley of Hinnom on farther south there, and as we come up there, this is the Tower of the Ovens. So I'm just not certain about that. Yeah,
This is Tower of Jerusalem.
Tower of Jerusalem.
That's what it says, Tower of Jerusalem. My Bible does.
Okay.
You'll be up in your mind.
Okay. Let's see. Any thoughts? Any comments on that? I don't really have any information on that handy. All right, so let's continue here with this in verse 12 there. We find that next to him was an individual by the name of Shalom, the son of Halasheth, leader of half the district of Jerusalem. He and his daughters made repairs. So here we find another individual who was leader of the half of half the district of Jerusalem. Again, the same comments we made earlier would possibly apply in this situation. But observe there, it says, he and his who, or what? Now, daughters made repair. They got the women out there working as well. So then verse 30, most of the women probably working on the Tower of Ovens. No, maybe not. Now, that's a very good point. In this case, he probably didn't have any sons. It was his daughters that were helping. All right, notice there in verse 13. And so we have Hanun, and the inhabitants of the Noah repaired the valley gate. They built it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars, repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the refuse gate. Now let me switch back over to the chart. We were looking at that a while ago. There's the valley gate, and down here is going to be the refuse gate. And they said that they completed 1,000 cubits. One note that I have puts that about 500 yards. 500 yards roughly. So this is a long stretch of the wall for them to be working on. To build up and to get put into place there. Sometimes build up from ground up, possibly other times repairing. Just depending on the current state of the wall. Any thoughts or comments?
Why does
the
it-
Bible says 1,500 feet, but that's exactly the same.
Yeah, 500 yards, 1,500 feet. How about 457 meters? I'll eat my tomato and you have your tomato. No. But that's a good point. That would have been, that's actually a better way of stating it, though, 1,500 feet. It kind of, gives the full size of it. 5 football fields. There we go. We can relate to that.
Without the end zones.
Yeah.
That's not part of the field.
Miss Pat, did you have your hand up?
No, I'll ask it later.
You sure? Okay. All right. All right. You always worry about those questions.
Oh, no.
No.
No worry.
No, not at all.
Only if John's asking them.
All right. So here we have verse 14 there. We have you need to behave yourself or else I'll make y'all read. We have Malchihah, the son of Rechab, leader of the district of Beth Hakerem. He repaired what gate? Refuse gate. Now, what do you think the refuse gate was used for? Probably trash. Yeah, refuse. Taking it out to the valley at the end of there. And he built it and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. Again, verse 15, we have there that Shalom, the son of Kolhor, is leader of the district of Mizpah. He repaired the fountain gate, built it, covered it, hung its doors with its bolts and its bars. He also repaired the wall of the pool of Shelah by the king's garden, as far as the stairs that go down from the city of David. So, as we continue here, you kind of see how this develops here. We have the lower pool, the pool of Siloam there, possibly the king's pool. Here we have the king's garden, and then you see the city of the refuse gate or dung gate, and then the fountain gate. So he had this whole lower section here that it was his responsibility to rebuild, repair, and to bring back to the state it needed to be in. Okay? Any thoughts or comments? Okay. Wouldn't have this been beautiful to have gone back and seen? I mean, not so much the sheer beauty, because at this point they're not building for beauty. They're building for protection, but still,
To me, the
to
beauty
see
is,
this.
to me, the beauty is in the people being
Yeah,
the workers.
that's an excellent point.
That to me, this is one, it's a job that was too much for one man. Nehemiah, yes, he goes back and everything, but just as the church, it's never to one man.
Right.
Jesus, he was the deity, but when he gives the charge for the church, it's never to one man to do it. It's not just to the elders, it's not just to the preacher, it's not just to the deacons, or it's to all the members to go out and build up the church.
That's exactly right.
And the beauty that's seen in this, I know it's cumbersome reading over the names, but there's such an inner beauty to this particular chapter of common work.
Yeah.
And it's our job. It's our common work to build up this church, to build up the Lord's church.
There was a sermon that Ron and I heard when we were down in Florida on Sunday night, and it was preached by Russ Bowman, and he'll be here with us in 2017, I believe it is. But the congregation asked him to speak that night, so he gave instructions. I want everybody to read Leviticus 1 through 11 before tonight. And his point was his whole sermon came from the instructions regarding sacrifices. Now, he didn't read through the whole text there. But many times we look at the Leviticus text and say, man, let's get to chapter 10. That's where 2 people die. Rest of it is just a bunch of rules and regulations. But there's a lot of interesting detail within there to get us to fully recognize what a sacrifice actually was. And I won't get into much detail on this, but essentially, the individual who was going to have the sacrifice made on his behalf had to bring it, had to hold it, had to kill it. You know, and then you had the animal there squirming as it bled out and everything. You had to do all this in order for the priest to use it. You know, and then when you read through that, you see, oh, this was what a real sacrifice was like. Now this is what Christ did for us. Yeah, so beautiful, beautiful story there.
I would take issue with one statement there, though. The animal doesn't squirm. Christ did not squirm on the cross either. He did not fight back in any way. And the lamb was representative of Jesus on the cross. When you cut the throat of the lamb lays there and does not fight.
It doesn't. I don't know. I would. Well, I've never seen that happen before.
I've done it.
You slit the throat of a lamb and had it bled out there.
Absolutely.
It doesn't.
You lay a lamb on the table.
Mm-hmm.
You don't shoot them like cattle or hogs or anything. You just lay them on a table very gently. And they lay there quietly. And you take the knife and you run it right in the side here, and then you turn the knife and slice it right out. And they bleed right there, and the lamb just lays there.
Well, in the Leviticus description, it has the individual holding the head and cutting the throat of it. So it would be a little bit different than the lamb simply laying down and taking it. The lamb would be standing up and you would hit it. But his analogy wasn't that Christ squirmed on the cross. He was just showing that what you had to go through and how gory it was. I mean, in his point, that was a good point. Oftentimes we picture, priests in the pretty white garments, and everything. More than likely, at the end of the day, there was blood splatter. And you think about the veil; they had to actually sprinkle blood on the veil. Can you imagine if we had a heavy veil hung that probably 1,000 times a day, blood was splattered on that veil, and unless it had some sort of stain guard on it, it was interesting. So anyway, this was Pat.
I used to have a real hard time getting over the fact that God required all these animals to be killed, and they had to be absolutely perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And until I came to realize in Leviticus how it tells them that they individually had to hold their own personal animal and personally kill it and watch it bleed. Sin is personal. It is not for you to take my sin, because even if you were a priest, it's not for the priest, it's for the individual to see how bad sin is.
That's right.
Because it takes lives. It'll take your life if you don't clean it up before you die.
That's exactly right.
It's a horrible thing.
And Christ died as a result of our sin, our personal, individual,
Personally.
the way we need to view it. We know He died for mankind.
That doesn't hurt my feelings, but you know
Yeah.
what? I can't help but cry when I make it personal.
That's right. Because
I
of your
killed-
sins. Because of my sin. That's right.
I killed Christ.
Yeah. That's the reason for that. That's a very good point. Very, very good point. Okay. Let's start there in verse 16 now. And going a little bit farther here with this. Now we have another Nehemiah comes on to the scene. And after him we have Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, leader of half the district of Bethzur. He made repairs as far as the place in front of the tombs of David, to the man-made pool, and as far as the house of the mighty. All right, so if we kind of bring the chart back up here, we're not told a whole lot regarding that upper region. You'll see as you see the city of David there. But bring it up a little bit, we do have we'll see a heading on up there towards the Watergate. Not the Watergate that we remember from years ago, of course. But anyway, we'll get to that one, or to the Watergate. But anyway, so in front of the tombs of David and to the man-made pool as far as the house of the mighty. What do you think the house of the mighty probably is referencing?
Verse 17, 20.
Gives a reference to what?
2 Kings 20.
2 Kings 20:20. Okay. Possibly it could be referring to on up towards the temple, the house of the mighty, or it might reference the house of the king, although I'm not so certain that that's what it would be referencing. And the fact that we see a capitalization indicates that the publisher or the translators here believe the house of the mighty could be referencing to the house of God.
It says, "By the rest of the act of Hezekiah, all is mighty, and how he made a pool and a tunnel and brought water into the city are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the King of Judah?
Okay, referencing the Hezekiah the Mighty, possibly.
Yes, he has changed it back down to lowercase, and it's called the House of the Mighty Men.
The House of the Mighty Men. Well, now you think about that. You think about where he's building the tombs up here. He made repairs in front of the tombs of David, as well as the man-made pool. And so if it was referenced to the House of the Mighty Men, it could be referenced to some sort of sepulcher.
And part suggests that it was the house of band of soldiers or the city guards.
Oh, that would make sense as well. The city guards.
Then lowercase.
That would make sense.
King James uses lowercase as confirmation. Other versions use lowercase.
Okay.
Or New King James uses
Application. Well, probably in this case, if not a reference to the temple, then being just a personal name to the what was built there. You know, that's a very good point. We don't see the word men here, but possibly being a house to the guards or a location for the guards or the protectors. Interesting point there. Okay, any thoughts? All right, let's come on down to verse 13 now. Not 17, I'm sorry. All right, so after him, we find the Levites under Rehum, the son of Benai, made repairs. We have next to him Hashabiah, leader of half the district of Keilah, and made repairs for his district. Verse 18, after him their brethren under Leviah, the son of Henadad, leader of the other half of the district of Keilah, made repairs. And then verse 19, and next to him Ezer, the son of Jeshua, the leader of Mizpah. He repaired another section in front of the ascent to the armory at the buttress. Kind of talked about, again, the leader of Mizpah there coming down to participate in this. Verse 20, after him Baruch, the son of Zabai, carefully repaired the other section from the buttress to the door of the house, and Eliashib, the house of Eliashib, the high priest. All right, so pausing there for just a moment. We come back to look at this here. We basically see there's just a continuing process of rebuilding the wall, of getting it reestablished to where it would be fully strengthened and completed as it should be. Okay, any thoughts or comments? All right, let's see. A little bit more reading here. Let's go back to verse 21 now. So after him we have Merimoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Uriah, the son of Koz, repaired another section. Then you've got the door from the door of the house of Eliashib to the end of the house of Eliashib. And then verse 22, we have after him the priests, the men of Plain, made repairs. Verse 23, we have Benjamin and Hashab made repairs opposite their house. Then you have Azariah, the son of Messiah, the son of Ananiah, made repairs to his house. 24, we have Benui, the son of Henadad. He makes more repairs from the house of Azariah to the buttress, even as far as the corner. Verse 25, Palal, the son of Uzziah, made repairs opposite the buttress and on the tower which projects from the king's upper house, that was by the court of the prison. After him, Pedaiah, the son of Parosh, made repairs. Moreover, the Nethinim who dwelt in Ophel made repairs as far as the place in front of the water gate toward the east and on the projecting tower. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a moment. Here we have the water gate being kind of roughly identified here. Hit another point that we can kind of hang on to for a second. And a little bit, we're going to come up here a little bit farther. Again, and this isn't really reading that would just enthrall us, but it's interesting to see what's being done here. The Bible sometimes gives us great detail, down to the very person. Other times it just says this was done. All right, any thoughts or comments, though?
Elisha built the sheep gate, and he didn't worry about his house.
That's a very good point.
Sheep gate was first for him.
That's a very good point there. He took care of that, and others took care of his house. Good point. Any other thoughts? All right, let's see. Let's go a little bit farther here, see if we can get the reading taken care of before the end of the class period. After them, the Tokites, we referenced them earlier, repaired another section next to the great projecting tower as far as the wall of Ophel. We saw that earlier when looking there at our map there. We see the Tower of Ophel, or the wall of Ophel by the water gate there, and then the wall of Ophel right above that there. And then continuing on up there, verse 28, beyond the horse gate, the priest made repairs, each in front of his house. All right, so we just saw the horse gate looking at that a little bit farther there, northward on that one. And then as he continued there, after them Zadok, the son of Immer, he made repairs in front of his own house. And then we have Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate. He made repairs. And then verse 30, Hananiah, the son of Shemaiah, and Hunam, the sixth son of Zalpah, repaired another section. We have Mushalam, the son of Berechiah, made repairs in front of his dwelling. Verse 31, after him Malchariah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs as far as the house of the Nethanim. Nethanim, again, were basically helpers of priests, kind of the workers or assistants for the priests. And the merchants in front of Mithkad Gate, and as far as the upper room at the corner. So let's jump back over to our chart real quick. We'll see just a little bit farther up here, just a couple of things to note. The horse gate. We'll see a mustard gate, a corner tower, gate of the guard as well. I'm not sure, that might have been a reference to the mighty men that we referenced a while ago there. Okay. Any thoughts or comments about this? All right, let's see. Let's come down now to verse 32. And we're actually just one verse away from the bottom, aren't we? And between the upper room at the corner, as far as the sheep gate, we have the goldsmiths and the merchants. They make repairs. Okay. So essentially, and this, especially when we hit chapter 3, we're going to find that the building, is their work has been to such a level that Sanballat and others are looking at it and they're getting upset because they are succeeding. They are succeeding in rebuilding the wall all the way around the city there, all the way around the temple. Any thoughts or comments?
I love the idea of repairing your own house.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the case with us, with Christians today. Start, work on our homes, work on our dwellings as far as spiritually speaking.
Absolutely. It is far too easy to be a Sanballat, to be focused on other people and their lives and their problems, to be critical of them and what they're doing and not looking at one's own house. Yeah. And before we can ever expect to provide protection for our spiritual house, for ourselves, for our families, we must make certain that our walls are built, that our walls are complete.
Here's an interesting comment from Spurgeon
Uh-huh.
in this verse. He says, and so by the labors of all, the circle of the wall was complete, and Jerusalem was protected. The church of God in our day needs building up, and it is the duty of each believer to take his share in the work. What can we do? Let the question go round among us. What can I do? Do I really love the Lord and trust in his Son Jesus? If so, what shall I do? My Savior's praise.
That's a very good point. Because the body of Christ is not in disarray. However, the body of Christ must continue to grow. And it's our individual as individuals, our responsibility to see to it that the church continues to grow. And I think it's an interesting comparison there with that. That was Spurgeon. Charles?
Yeah, that was Charles Spurgeon. It's a devotional commentary that he's making here. But the point is, it bothers me a great deal personally when I know that there's work to be done here. And we have men that will do that work. Mm-hmm. But we have other people, men and women, who are capable of doing that work, who sit back and let the others do it. Yeah. If everybody did their part, it'd be a lot less work on each individual. But overall, the church would grow much more rapid because everybody is pitching in and doing their part. And as we grow with talents and everything, this is the other thing that bothers me. You have people who are converted to Christ, and they never, 20 years, they never do anything different from what they started. They refuse to lead prayer, they refuse to participate in the Lord's Supper, they refuse to teach Bible class. Well, and then they get to a point, well, I'm too old.
I'll let the younger people do it.
Yeah. This is a good point.
John, can you make that go down a little bit?
I sure can.
And we youngers need young.
Yep.
And we're not as young to help us.
Well, I like the example and what Dale's saying there. Remember the nobles, the Tulkites, because of whatever reason. Let's say it was because they were jealous of Nehemiah. They were unwilling to work. You've got brethren in the church like that. Well, if I can't do that or be that person, then I'm not going to be part of it. It's not if it's not my idea, I don't want to be a part of it. Type mentality there, and that's a very good point. And the admonition to everybody to be a part, even the smallest of parts, is a crucial part. You think if we're going to use a modern day example of like a computer chip, the computer chip is made up of just minuscule transistors. I mean, just so small, and thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And if you have one go out, the whole thing stops. The smallest of part is just as crucial as the largest. Yes, Ms. Packard.
I was just thinking the analogy of David and Goliath. If you use Goliath as fear, which everyone feared him, make
Sure.
him real, he's feared.
Right.
That's why a lot of people don't slay fear. I mean, fear is your biggest enemy when it comes to putting your house in order.
That's
For
right.
some reason, he's a Goliath, and it's very fearful.
That's right. This is exactly right. And when you have a baby in Christ, especially now, I'll tell you who this is difficult on. I'll take Mike as an example. Both he and Alan. Well, he and Alan were raised in the church for all intents and purposes. Okay, so for the last 13 years of their life, all they've known is what goes on in worship services. So it is not an uncommon thing to see men lead singing, to see someone lead a public prayer, to see someone wait on the table, to see someone reading scripture. But now take someone who's never been. Maybe they have no experience with going to the church as it would be. And you teach them and they come in. The whole idea of standing up in front of people and leading a prayer and doing this or doing that could be extremely scary. Or it could be on the other side, an ego trip. Some people could look at, ooh, I now get to do this. So that's where proper teaching comes in to make sure they understand. There was a brother years ago who's, I think I referenced him before as an example, not very faithful. His family would be off and on. And I didn't know this when I first moved to this congregation. And so he was there a lot, and we were talking about elders. And his name was kind of brought up. And I mentioned it to him. Have you ever thought about, well, I tell you, the next Sunday he was there shaking everybody's hands. I mean, almost like a politician, lobbying for an office. And then once, a further discussion of it, the men decided we really don't have any qualified men at this point. Once it was done, he went back to his old self. Very sporadic in attendance and, going back to what he truly was before I got in there and what they knew more about it. And so the point is, when we teach a new convert, especially if this is the first time they're exposed to anything like what we do here, we have to work with them to keep everything as it should be so that they can do their part.
And keep encouraging our young ones that just became Christians, because just speaking of Michael personally, he's scared to death the first time he read scriptures. I know he did fine, but he was scared to death. And then Sunday, he was scared to death. He said, Mom and knees were knocking. And all he was doing was passing a tray. But encourage our young ones as well. And I'm saying, and all of y'all are so good about doing that and everything, but we need to understand that as they slay those little giants, and what may be in our mind little giants, as they slay those little giants, we need to be behind them saying, you can slay the next one. You can keep on going. And that's what we need to do for each and every one of us. If there's something that each of us are facing and we overcome it, and somebody knows it, go behind them and say, you did a great job, and let's go on to the next one.
Well, my attitude is if I can fall publicly and get back up and keep going, they can handle it.
You're
Ain't no problem.
inspiring.
No, I'm kidding. That's not.
Michael loves that too.
The
Miss
more
Doris.
they do it, the better they get.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly.
And encouragement means a lot.
They do. And they appreciate that so much, those young ones do.
Yeah. So
And the young ones' parents do.
go ahead, Gene.
We use young men here periodically
Mhm.
to bring a lesson. Some are more accomplished than others.
Right.
But every one of them needs encouragement.
That's right.
There's nothing that improves your public presentation more than doing it.
That's right.
And I don't mean just the lesson, I mean other things, up in front of the public, those things build, they're cumulative in terms of confidence. And I personally try to make it a point of speaking to the young men who preach.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know, I haven't been there, done that, you know. That's scary when you first start.
Yeah.
You wonder, I'm watching the clock, I'm running over 8 o'clock, and should I quit? And how do you, then the question is, how do you fold the invitation into that? That, to me, is always the hardest part of the lesson. How do you fold the invitation into your lesson?
And there are a lot of preachers today who have quit doing that. You know, pretty much they'll end the sermon and they may say, if you want to become a Christian, come forward now, but it's no drawn out process. It's just speech is done. Let's go. You know, and
I think talking to Micah, and to Calvin, they need that.
yes,
They're young Christians. They need that, and it'll be a lot easier the next time.
mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is, and your point's well taken, because one of the reasons why we want those young men to get up there and preach is because they're the future elders of this congregation.
You bet.
And the time to start training them is when they're young, not when they get older.
Now, let me throw one thing out there before we end, just to kind of flip the coin over, because I agree with what's been said, but our young ladies don't get the same opportunities as our young men do, as far as publicly, to wait on the table. And they're not in that position where it's obvious to say, oh, let's go tell them they've done a good job. You know, we need to look at the way they behave themselves in worship, how they, carry themselves, how they live as Christians, and commend them as well, you know.
I think one of the things that Rhonda does in her class with the Williams,
Mm-hmm.
she brings the young ladies in with them, and that's where you start.
That's right.
That's where you start
That-
teaching children, but then you move up to first, second, third graders, then it becomes different.
Yeah.
You start at the bottom.
Exactly.
Start with Rhonda does in her class. That gives them experience, exposure of how to deal with,
That's right.
how to teach, how to deal with children and so on.
Give them something to do, give them something to learn, beyond simply sitting in the pew, and commend them as well. Yeah.
And get them involved with service of others. That the teenage girls, that was a whole lesson that, we dealt with the fact that, we can serve others by sending cards, we can serve others by calling, we can serve others by making a meal, we can serve others by preparing the Lord's Supper, by volunteering to, that classroom's a wreck, let me go in and pick it up.
Right.
There's so many things, and that's what I constantly try to tell them. Our roles are different, but that doesn't mean our service is. We have jobs that we need to be doing, and we can't be pew warmers and think God's going to be happy with just that.
That's right.
We have to be serving this church.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There is not another feeling that you can get when you stand up and say what you're supposed to say. When you teach, when you get into the auditorium, it's completely different.
Right.
But it can still be done.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
Going back to what you were saying about the young women and everything, and when I say young women, I'm talking about 18 years and older. These are the women that need to be taught that they can teach classes, because Ron Witt really gets frustrated. He feels like he really has to pull teeth to get people to volunteer to teach each quarter. And it shouldn't be that difficult. We've got enough members here that if you have, we got 3 classes basically that need teachers, constantly women teachers, and men teachers can do it too. But if you had 12 people that volunteered on a regular basis to teach those classes. That means 1 quarter a year they would be teaching.
Mhm. Yeah.
But yet, he's put in a position where he has to ask the same individual to teach 2 quarters, because we can't get enough people to volunteer.
What we're doing is kind of a building process. The younger ladies, teach them, so then in 5 or 6 years, we've got plenty to be able to put in the system a teaching organizational structure that doesn't demand 3 years commitment from one person, but a quarter to the time, and there's something to be said for the kids in having different teachers as well. I mean, one person could teach someone 5 years and it'd be okay, but I think the kids learn better when they have different teachers, brought in and out of the particular class, because different personality, different teaching methods, different focus, things like that. Okay, well, that's well beyond Nehemiah, other than the great comparison of how they built the wall, we build the local church, and we all do our part and teach our brethren to do their part as well. So, great lessons to take home with us. I appreciate everyone coming out this morning. Let's continue next Tuesday morning by looking at the questions of chapter 3. Then we'll step into chapter 4 and look at Sanballat's problem with what's going on here. Sanballat had a lot of problems with what was going on. So tonight, Spiritual Way broadcast at 7:30 at spiritualway.org. Luke is going to be sitting in tonight with Dell and I, so he'll be joining us this evening. I appreciate those at home joining us for our study this morning. Before we dismiss, I'll ask. Oh, yes, Jimmy.
Can I have one question? Here, a couple of 3 or 4 weeks ago, when they had a big weather problem in the Philippines, Ron made a comment that should we found out what that preacher was needed, he'd let us know so we could make some kind of contribution. Did you ever hear anything about that?
We never got any as far as where Rosalita was at.
Yeah.
Any serious needs.
Okay.
That never, as far as from his particular
Okay,
area.
I heard more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's. Anyway, if you're ever interested, there are certain needs that come up that the church itself can't help with. They had one recently where the church there where he's at, they needed to essentially build better bathrooms, is what it amounts to, for sanitary reasons and everything. And they were needing a little bit of help, so some individuals got together. The church itself couldn't send money to that church for that. It's not a scriptural procedure there. But we had some individuals who contributed, and it wasn't much by comparison to what it would be here. And so if you're ever interested in that, if we hear of some specific situations that the local church cannot help with, let me know and I can pass it along, as we hear things like that. So. All right, Gene, would you mind dismissing us in word of prayer?
Our Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this time that we were able to spend together as Thy children to study Thy Word, to understand the wills that Thou hast for us and for Thy people everywhere. And Father, we pray that we might understand our need to be faithful to Thee, and we might remember the promises which we have today of the life which is to come. We thank You, Father, for the blessings we have today, and pray especially at this time for our brother R.J. Stevens. Efforts being made for him might return to a measure of health, and he might be once again able to work as he always has in laboring for Thy church. We pray, Father, that it would be with each of us as we leave, that Thou would care for us, and we would always look to Thee for strength, to Thy word, for truth. In the name of Thy Son we pray. Amen.